Hey guys, welcome to your figure painting overpainting tutorial. Today we are going to culminate our self-portrait in nature project by applying actual observed flesh tones to your underpainting of your figure. So let's get started. All right, here I've got laid out my overpainting flesh tone palette. Now, as we discussed in the flesh tone mixing video, I began with a base that works for my skin tone of ochre yellow and cadmium red, which you see right here. Tinted it up with a lot of white to get a middle flesh tone and a highlight flesh tone. And normally I wouldn't do this, but my quarantine skin is so pasty and gray and ashy and awful. I added a little ultramarine blue to gray out the skin tone just a little bit. And I'll probably have to add a little red too, but that's pretty darn close. I also used this same base, the cadmium red with the ochre yellow, with a shot of ultramarine blue to mix my shadow tone, because all flesh has shadows. And you'll notice this shadow tone has a lot of white in it. You always want to put a hit of light into every one of your flesh tones, including shadow tones. And this all goes for every single tone of flesh there is. All flesh has a lot of light in it and reflecting off of it. So don't skimp on that white for your tones. A couple other colors that I've mixed on my palette today. This lovely deep mixture is made out of burnt umber and ultramarine blue. Now this combination is a wonderful simple mix for dark hair, for eyebrows, eyelashes, and the pupils of eyes. And you see here I tinted it up with a little bit of white. It tones up to this nice neutral gray, and you can hit that with a little more burnt umber if you want to brown it up for lighter hair. And this tone works also with the whites of your eyes. Now remember, the whites of our eyes are not bright pure white. They're really more of a grayish tone, and this same mixture that works for hair, eyelashes, eyebrows, and the pupils of eyes, tinted up with a lot more white, work really nicely for the whites of eyes as well, as we'll see in a little bit. Now, today, as you recall, I'm starting my second hit. That means I've completed my first hit. I've got all the canvas covered with a thin layer of lean paint. And lean paint is paint that's only mixed with a little bit of solvent just to get it flowing and easy to move. Now that my entire canvas is covered, I am going to need to fatten up my second hit layer with some medium. And I really like to use Winsor Newton's Original Liquid. It's just a good all-purpose, pretty economical pre-mixed medium, very good for glazing. So the first step is I'm going to slick my surface up with a layer of liquid on a loose bristle brush. You just want to sweep it on quickly. And this makes it easy as you build up paint layers to glaze and blend wet paint right over the dry so you don't get those dry edges that interfere with the overall quality of the painting. You don't have to be too precious here, just going for a thin scrum of liquid. I'm beginning with a good size flat bristle brush. I've got a variety of a few sizes of brushes ready to go here, a couple smaller ones, and one big cheap hardware store bristle brush for blending and glazing. Now, because I've got liquid on my surface, I don't necessarily need to mix it into my paint on the palette. However, if your paint is feeling a little bit tight and stiff, you can feel free to mix a little bit of liquid into it. I'm going to begin with my shadow tone. Most people like to work shadow to light, though not necessarily everyone. So here we go. Just starting with big, broad strokes. Ooh, look how that shadow tone glows on top of that blue underpainting. I'm gonna start just very thick and rough. With a few big, broad strokes with my large brush just to get everything down there. And there we have my first application of shadow. Now preparing to apply my light flesh tone. Remember, when loading that bristle brush, you want to push and drag the brush. Get it nice and loaded up with pigment right to the top of those bristles. That's what they're for. Now, applying my first light tone, and I'm going to finesse these a good deal as we move along. Work them into each other and also tweak them around. I can add a little bit more cadmium red here and there, or a little bit more ochre yellow, or a little more white, or a little more ultramarine blue. There, see, I'm working with the whole body of the brush. So we get a nice big payload of paint right there on the surface. And I'm now continuing in with a slightly smaller bristle brush, still keeping those strokes pretty big and loose. You see, I have all the very most basic lights and shadows of my face blocked in, and of my arm as well. Now this is going to take a lot more finessing. I just used big strokes with my stiff bristle brushes to get these basic flesh tones in place, and now I'm going to use these same brushes along with a softer nylon brush. Where is it? Oh, now you can see it there. To begin to blend and push these tones into one another. So start basic, starting general to specific, the very basic light and shadow mixture. One quick tip: the upper lip is practically always going to be darker than the lower lip. It's a good way to set them apart, unless you've got a flashlight right underneath your face. Now I can begin to move in and soften up some of these relationships. And this is only the very beginning. I'm going to be softening, finessing, moving these edges around as I travel around the figure. Now I'm not digging into the surface with the brush. Now I'm just kind of kissing gently with the tips of the bristles. Going to be a lot of lovely pushing and pulling in this process. Now moving down here to the hand and the wrist. Dry my brush off a little bit. And now I can begin to push this shadow tone and the highlight tone back and forth, getting them a little bit less strictly partitioned. A little bit more light into those shadows, working a little bit more shadow into the light. You'll see I'm doing the same thing over here, just kind of working with a dirty brush, but giving it a wipe every so often just to get off the excess. You can move the edges right up to each other, begin to work up that edge quality, and work more and more subtlety into these shadow-light relationships. As you can see, I've spent some time pushing and pulling these very basic, very initial flesh tones, just a shadow tone, one or two highlight tones, and you'll recall the shadow was pretty dark when I first applied it, and I spent a lot of time with the brush bristle tips in the wet paint, pushing and pulling these tones together. So what I'm ending up with here in the end of the second hit is a range of middle highlight and shadow tones. They all wound up being quite cool. The light is pretty gray and dark today. I also began to incorporate a little bit of the burnt umber ultramarine blue mixture to just block in the corners of the eyes and to carve out the edges of the face a tiny bit. So we're still in a very low range of tones here, and I'm thinking this is probably a good time for me to stop before the surface gets too saturated or I do anything too disastrous. There's a lot of anatomical pushing and pulling around here too. The edges of the hand, the thumb, still troubleshooting here and there. This is a process, but I've got my second hit with the knife starting to be blocked in, and my reflection and my hand more or less begun. Next hit, I'm going to go in with deeper shadows, warmer, brighter highlights, and I'm by no means resolved with this background either. I'm going to spend some more time building that up too. But remember, you can go back and forth, but building back to front is kind of what we're going for in our process. But that doesn't mean you can't break the rules. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this demo. Happy painting. I'll see you soon. Bye.